Lisa, I would like to ask you to share an article that you published, you were co-author of, and I believe it was 2017. And it was called Presentation, Mentoring, Workplace Learning, and Performance Improvement, Evidence, Evaluation, and Research Methods Updates from a Multiple Studies Review. I know that was a mouthful, but can you maybe just break down for our listeners the purpose of that study and maybe what the conclusion was?
Sure. Yeah. The purpose was to, again, we were talking a little bit earlier about how, sometimes we're really only able to see what on our own TV screen, learn from our own history, our own mistakes. But when you start looking at a lot of different studies and a lot of different organizations, you start to see patterns that jump out at you. And then you start to realize, okay, there are some fundamental things that are perhaps, no matter what context, I can probably lean into them and they're going to give me the desired results. So that was the purpose of this article, to try to start taking a more systematic approach and systemic approach to looking at what needs to go into a mentoring program design. Mentoring programs can help you meet a lot of strategic business objectives, but not all. There's a lot of consideration, again, that needs to happen in order to implement them effectively and get the results that you're hoping for. And one of the key points to mentoring systems, oftentimes they're there to support organizational culture and help build organizational culture, help ensure better retention, as well as knowledge and skills transfer to incoming or to rising employees and leaders inside of organizations. But if you don't take the organizational culture into consideration, the outcomes that you're driving towards inside of the organization, and you don't feed those into your design considerations, chances are it's not going to hit the mark.
Yeah.
So that article, the purpose of that article was to help people who want to either start a mentoring program or make changes to their mentoring programs so that they're starting to realize all of the potential results that they could realize, to help them think about, what are the top 10 things they need to consider. And if you're going to set up a program or add to your program or change your program somehow, what are the things that probably should go into place that are tried and true evidence-based practices?
Yeah. Well, I really appreciated the article, Lisa. And once again, I think there's lots to learn from that type of work. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I mean, evidence-based research such as that really helps substantiate what is effective and efficient L&D practice.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, we started the conversation off by talking about, effective L&D principles. And what does that mean exactly? And how do we know for sure? Mm-hmm. And you just mentioned it yourself that there are. I mean, when you look across various organizational contexts, or when you look at, multiple studies, and you kind of look at the big picture, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's fair to say that there's certainly foundational principles that can help guide effective L&D practice.
Yeah.
Is that a true statement?
Yeah. And I think in the past, especially with mentoring program, there's been a lot of theory. There's been a lot of postulation. There hasn't been a lot of looking at the evidence, looking at empirical results. And so that was the value add of this article. There weren't any reviews that looked at many different examples of what happens when you have a mentoring program, what was great about it, what didn't work so well. Yeah, that's where that practice and research, you can't do good research without having good practice, but you also can't have good practice if you don't consider the research, or you can, at least you're not going to get state-of-the-art practice anyways.
Yeah. And I think, and Lisa, you'd actually mentioned this once or twice in this conversation, as practitioners, we just can't simply rely on our own experience alone. I mean, even if as a practitioner, you've had some wins, let's call it, along the way, and made a difference in organizations, you can't just always rely on your single context experience.
Absolutely.
Because every organization is different. And, if you're sticking to those, I would say L&D principles, that's one thing. But, at some point, what you do as a practitioner in one context may not apply very well in other contexts. But there are principles that do apply across contexts that are quite effective.